Okay, back on the AI Growth Hacking Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Best, here with my brother, Addison. This is, I would say, the most excited I've been for a podcast talking about the Chinese DeepSeek that they have just launched, their new large language model. And we have a ton to say. Now, we both lived in China for 13 years. We're Canadian, not American. So we're not like overly pro-China, but we're not like unusually pro-US either. I mean, we are Westerners, so we're in that hemisphere. But the idea is I think we have an interesting and objective take on everything going on with DeepSeek and can provide some unique insights that I don't think anybody else is really talking about. So before I get you in here, we'll just talk about some of the main things. So it's free to use, 27 times cheaper than OpenAI's O1 model, the thinking model with API use, open source. You can see what it's thinking. You can jump in here right now if just your first comments on DeepSeek. How surprised were you with this?
I'm pretty surprised in the sense that I didn't think some company especially would come up with something so quickly and comparable to GPT or whatever, just the chatbot itself, and just how cheap it is, how quickly they made it. And they really are a competitor. That was the surprising part. Just like all the things and all the choices they made, like where did it come from? Like out of nowhere, it's already amazing.
So they said it's like a hedge fund company, and these guys are doing this on their side project, and it cost them $6 million as opposed to hundreds of millions that OpenAI and these other models, Gemini, Claude, that they generally cost. So it's way cheaper that they made. So they had a lot of interesting insights that they put out in their paper. Like they did some neat research. They obviously have some smart people working on it, but I'm going to get into the conspiracies as well and give those some credence as we go on, because there's really a lot good, bad. Overall, I think the good news is it's good for for us as a user of AI, because they have made things cheaper, more efficient. They've pushed the ball forward. They've definitely done some things. There are some possible shady things going on in the background. There's really a lot to get into, but overall it's like pretty much on par, I'd say, with OpenAI's O1 thinking model. We've used it. So you could use either one. We pay for OpenAI like $20 a month or whatever. This thing's free. I use both just to check it out. But the interesting thing is, let's talk about some of the good things that they did behind the scenes. So one of them, how did they get it to be so efficient, was one of the concepts that they did, which is really cool, is this mixture of experts concept. I'm not sure if they came up with that term, but they use this very well. So like a big model like GPT-4 is trained on, you can think of it like the entire internet. And more, every single thing they could get their hands on. So it's intelligent. It has a lot of info, but it's big. So what this DeepSeek did was basically said, instead of, when you ask it a question, instead of having all of the experts and all of the information available, it knew where to zero in on which expert. So imagine like if you're at a library and you have a question, going to the right book first would be a lot better than reading through every single book every time you get a question in the library. Or like if you have a psychologist, a doctor, and a lawyer, and you're asking a question about law, there's really no point in having all of those experts ready to answer the question and kind of paying for them with electricity costs, which are a fortune. Instead, DeepSeek figured out how to analyze what type of question it is and then ask which expert they wanted to ask for that question. And then that saved like, I don't know, 95 or more % of the energy. That was just one thing they did.
Yeah, that's a pretty huge difference compared to what OpenAI does. And I guess just the training, as you said, it was $6 million or whatever to train it compared to billions for OpenAI. So they had an interesting mechanism to
Hundreds of millions.
right. So an interesting mechanism, obviously, to have a reward system to make the model really good quickly. So I think a lot of other companies, and probably including OpenAI, will learn from this, which is also the good thing, to even like make everything, all the models better, not just this DeepSeek. So that's cool. So they came up with their own strategies that actually worked and really improved it. So it should help across the board going forward. So that's the exciting part, I think, as well.
Right. They published this, they learned obviously from the Western models, they published their insights, and now everybody else is going to say, okay, how can we do the same thing? And they will very shortly. So this is a huge win. And I think you were touching on there the reinforcement learning that they also did, which is cool. So, like, I love playing chess, and I've always followed the chess AI, how Google's DeepMind did that with AlphaZero, and basically you get the chess engine to play like a trillion games against itself. You only tell it the rules, so it starts, randomly moving pieces, and anytime that the game wins, they kind of give it a point. And anytime like a reward, essentially. Anytime the game loses, they say you failed. So with no strategy at all, it just randomly keeps playing and playing and playing, and all these wins make it better. And they didn't think that, here's the insight, they didn't think that they could do that with something like math or computer problems, but I call it DeepSeek sometimes, DeepSeek, they ended up showing that you could do it if you have a bunch of math problems, you show the computer the answer, and you say, I don't care how you solve it. If you get the right answer, we'll give you a point. And then it can come up with all kinds of creativity, much smarter than a human. Same with chess, just by like almost natural selection over time. If you do millions of trials, and it just figures out somehow randomly what's a good thing. And if the rewards are in the right place, then that works. So that was another huge insight.
It's a really big insight. And this should work really well with coding, which is also the great part. And that's how I use ChatGPT anyway. So to me, that'll be very important going forward. If it reinforces correct answers and like how to actually build software development should get better much quicker. And even the funny thing is, I asked ChatGPT 4.0, I gave it their API information. And I said, what do you think they'd be good at compared to ChatGPT? And they said, oh, yes, it would be great at coding and much cheaper. They had an example. I said because there's different ways of measuring the costs. There's a lot of factors in it. But even in their example, directly from ChatGPT 4.0's like search engine, it said it would be 7.5 times cheaper for a similar result for the R and compared to the O1 model with ChatGPT, which is pretty crazy. So 7.5 times, even according to them. Like, who knows? That's just a theoretical number, obviously, too, until you test it.
So cheaper, but also should be a lot better because they're just starting out. So if you think about, like, in the West, they have all these better and more NVIDIA chips. So if they take this concept and they go run it through their chips with more math problems and more computer coding problems, but use the same theory that DeepSeek showed, it should be almost infinitely better. Like if you do this random, reinforcement learning with like a million games of chess, it's not going to be very good. But if the more you do, the better improvements you get. There's really no upper limit on this type of thing. So like if they keep showing more and harder problems, like here's the problem, here's the solution, and then just like randomly trying to get it. If they keep going harder and deeper and more, it should be better and better. Like again, sky's the limit. So that is another huge insight to go with the mixture of experts combination. And then last thing quickly, Ed, due to the U.S. sanctions, so U.S. like they're in an arms race, they think, with China, fine. So they said, NVIDIA, you are not allowed to send your best chips, the H100s. You got to send them the lower quality H800s so that the U.S. has an advantage. But the thing is, a lot of people are saying this backfired because, if you have the worst chips, you have to be creative and think of a workaround. So they say the necessity is the mother of invention because, you can't use these awesome chips. You got to use your own brain to think, okay, what's a better way to be efficient? So now they're maxed out on efficiency because they had to. They only have the garbage chip. They're not garbage, but they're worse.
Right. And it allows for much smaller companies to dive into the game now. You're not going to need billions of dollars clearly to make your own model or do things. So I think it's going to bring a lot more competition to the whole game now because of that, which is also cool. And it'll be interesting what happens to NVIDIA now. Do we really need all these billions of dollars worth of chips? Like, what's going to happen to them? So a lot of questions still need to be answered. It's hard to say, or will they just use them and just make it way better? That could also happen, obviously.
Well, that's what I think, and that's what I want to talk about. So NVIDIA went down 16% yesterday, which was the biggest dollar loss, like hundreds of billions of dollars in one day of any company ever, because they were afraid of what you just said. Like, if it's so efficient, who needs these hundreds of billions of dollars of investment? But that brings up, see, this is why I don't agree, and you touched on it, is Javon's paradox, which is getting talked about lately. And that says when a resource becomes more efficient, the number of uses actually rise because more use cases are reasonable. So you end up using more, spending more. So one example is, imagine if driving your car like 2 kilometers or like a little bit more than a mile cost $100 of gas. Like, imagine if cars were that inefficient, then nobody would drive really. You couldn't afford to go anywhere. But if the car became more efficient, like in today's dollars, more gas would be purchased, even though it's more efficient, because everybody can afford a car essentially, and driving becomes something that people can afford. So as the efficiency goes up, the use goes up. It's the same with, like, what were our old computers we used to get 20 years ago? They weren't even a gigabyte. They were like a few hundred megabytes, right? Like, megabytes came down in cost dramatically, but people are spending more on computers and phones than ever because the use cases went up.
No, exactly. So it'll be people have their own personal GPUs, which they're already doing, but they'll just be, they'll be cheaper maybe or the same cost and actually useful at home. You can run your own AI models completely at home. That's what will happen. So a lot of people will be using them and creating stuff. So that in that sense, the demand and the market size will be much bigger of who would even buy these things.
I saw a podcast yesterday it was a guy in a university saying, I would love to run these things, but we don't have the hundreds of billions. But hey, if it's going to be that efficient, now we can maybe get one and do something reasonable. That's one thing. And then another thing is audio and video costs a fortune to generate. So nobody's really doing it. But now if you can get it more efficient, that takes a ton of resources. But if it becomes efficient, like in that car gas example I gave, I think people will be using it. It's just going to be, you can generate yourself on video, things get better, it's clearer. Because the API costs are still too much for a lot of use cases. But, once those come down, it just opens up all kinds of other things. And then a whole bunch of things we can't even think of that are just, solving incredibly complicated problems.
Exactly. So now we've pretty much touched on why it's kind of amazing what they did. Maybe we can talk about some other things that maybe aren't so good or just kind of a different stance in comparison to other models and companies.
Well, okay. So yeah, so we wanted to be fair on I'll tell you like a few before we go into their image generation, which was terrible, and some certain things. I wanted to get into a few of the conspiracies for fun here. One is that let's go one by one. So one of them is they actually have all these H100 models. They're lying about it because, they basically have to lie about it because they're in violation of the sanctions, and they were able to just bid on the black market and get them in there. What do you think of that idea?
Well, it's possible, but it will be either proven to be true or debunked because people now it's open source and they even said how they did it. So that means people are going to try it themselves with these models because they are open source. So, that might be true, might not be, but we'll find out soon if it is true. And it'll be hopefully an interesting answer. And I hope it is true because that'll mean AI is going to get way better, way faster. So we'll see what happens. So, but I agree, like, who knows what's going to happen exactly, but it'll be we'll definitely, people will recreate it here and test.
it would be surprising to me if they don't have the chips. Like, I'm sure they could get around the sanctions somehow if they want to. However, like you said, this is open source and people can test this. I kind of think with this particular case, they did it on the low end chips, like they said. I'm sure they've got some stashed away somehow. That's just my guess. But they did publish how they did it, and a lot of people are saying, you know what, these are good breakthroughs. This makes sense. Um, so then there's that thing. And then the other bigger conspiracy, and OpenAI is wondering about this. Um, did China basically steal it? So they can do the, like, you're not allowed to on the terms, but you can somehow set up this, um, like a distilled, like when you're trying to make a distilled model, you can basically, it's like the teacher student models, they say. So if you start out with the student, you ask the teacher a million questions, and then from those answers, you learn and make a model that's pretty good. So that's essentially what distilling is. So imagine if China figures out a way to ask, or have the computer ask GPT 4.0 like millions of questions, take the best answers, and then train their model that way, which is one way of being so cheap. And there's some evidence for it, because they said, like, if you ask it, what model are you? It actually says, I'm GPT-4, although I think they changed that now, but that's what it was saying. And a lot of answers look word for word the same. And there's so many similarities between GPT-4 and DeepSeek that it seems like this one makes sense to me, that they, like, it's still creative, but that may have been like they needed OpenAI's model or another big one in order to make theirs. That's one theory out there. We'll see.
It's certainly possible. Or they could have just really tried to make it the same user experience, which would be pretty easy, and add it after the fact to really make it similar. It's hard to say exactly what they did, but honestly, I think these answers will come out when people do test it on, recreate whatever they just did and prove to be true or not. So yeah, I don't think it really matters at this point. I think it's also partly to stab back because NVIDIA went so far down and say, like, they're just kind of like complaining now and kind of being sore losers. There's also that possibility.
There is always the sore loser thing. And like, I don't really care either if they stole. I kind of think that they probably did do some shady things, but let's be honest, all of these AI companies are doing that. Like, they're not getting the data that they're allowed to get. They're getting whatever they can get their hands on and then making an excuse for it and then seeing what happens later. That's what they're all doing. So, if China could get this, I'm sure they would take it. And also, there's a lot of Chinese who work for these North American companies, and not a lot of Westerners who work. Like, there's nobody working in like DeepSeek. So it's hard to really, it's hard to transfer data the other way. And also, these Chinese researchers, a lot of them study in the US, they speak English, they have connections there, but all the data that China has, this is another advantage they have, is they can get the Western data somehow. But like, how many Western researchers speak Chinese, know people over there, can get all their, all that, their like Chinese math test science, all their research, all their social media data, like that kind of stuff's going to be locked away. So I feel like China can get both sets of data, like the Chinese and the Western are stuck with the Western data only. So I think that's a big advantage that China will have, because I don't see how the West is going to get that. And China will, I think, figure out a way to sneak it out, even the stuff they're not supposed to.
And yeah, that's certainly one argument. One thing I will say in the positive, though, which makes me think it's possible that they didn't, is they're really sharing a lot of stuff and making their models open source. And even they didn't have to share all that information with the West. So that, to me, that's kind of impressive that they did that. I don't hear the Western media, or some of them actually, to be honest, a lot of smart people are really happy that said, like, what a gift to the world. Like, some of the, really smart tech people have been saying that, like, what a great thing that they shared. So, I mean, that goes against that.
But that's the soft power. But what that does, that's positive though. Like, let's say that they're being selfish only, giving it away for free. The selfish take on that, even though it's a net positive, is like it knocked Nvidia's stock down. It sent a warning almost like, look what we can do any moment if you're thinking about going against us. It makes them kind of look good to the world. Like, not everybody is American. A lot of people in different countries are probably thinking, hey, this is cool. Now like it makes a more positive view overall for China, because they've had a lot of bad publicity over the years. And like, so this is just a positive thing for them. And it's a scorched earth approach, which means it really does smack down these Western companies. So it's a lot of good PR for them. So that there are reasons to do it, not just like a benevolent
Oh,
gift.
of course. And there's
But
also reasons that they want to get quickly to get market share people using it. And if they're using the API, China will have all their data, and China would love to have that. They would give it away for free if they had to. And really talk about scorched earth, if they actually give the API version for free or very cheap, that's a huge advantage because
which they are. I mean, they are doing it very cheap.
right. So you like currently, obviously, OpenAI couldn't even compete with the costs because it costs them way more to run it currently. So there's no way, if they actually tried to compete with price, they couldn't, or they'd lose so much money, obviously.
Yeah, they couldn't. Now, another thing the Western media complains about, and I think it's a fair complaint, but it's overplayed, is the censorship. Like I've heard people say, I could never trust DeepSeek because if you ask it about Taiwan or 1989 or Tibet, it'll basically say, I can't answer this. And like, they're really sensitive, but we lived over there for a long time. Now, I'm not saying that this is a positive at all. I'm just saying from their point of view, there are a few topics where they just say, you know what? We don't want people getting all riled up and having protests in the street. Like you can think about all the Israel Hamas stuff. Like they just don't want it. So they like their argument is like, okay, we think like we're not doing the 1989 stuff anymore, but what's the use of having everybody so angry about it? So let's just have them not really debate it. So like, let's have everybody focused on math and science. I'm not saying this is my point of view. Again, I'm a Westerner. I like free speech and all this, but that's their point of view. To like block a few things. It's not like everything's that blocked. And then the other thing is, if you look at how much the Western stuff is blocked, it's blocked in more of that woke kind of way than China really cares about. So they don't block like government sensitive issues so much, although they were blocking like COVID stuff. But like like if you say, tell me a racist joke, not that this is a nice thing to do. The Western ones will be less likely to do it. If you say like, tell me like from a biological perspective, why are men potentially smarter than women? Not that I think this is true, but you should be able to like rationally say, you could also rationally say like, here are biological reasons women could be smarter than men based on evolution. But the thing is, they'll shut the conversation down because, they just don't want people thinking about it. So all these models are afraid of something, especially image generation. You try to draw certain pictures, they'll say, forget about it. So they're all risk averse. They don't overdo it. I think if you go too crazy on the Taiwan stuff, you miss what's good about this, because it's like there's a lot of freedom there. It's just not nearly as much about government sensitive stuff, but
Exactly. They're all biased is the truth. And I mean, of course, China's is going to be more biased and even maybe more pro-China. But my guess is that, yes, ChatGPT, a lot of history questions and like who won the war and why, it's going to be biased for the US or certain countries. And that's okay too. So the good thing is now we can ask other models and get answers that are different. To me, that's a great thing. It doesn't mean I'm not going to use DeepSeek because it's biased, just like I still use ChatGPT, even though I know it's super biased in a lot of ways.
right. And like, I don't think we don't want to make a false equivalency here where it's like, oh, we don't see any difference between Chinese and Western governments. Like, again, we're Western, we're more like pro free speech and all this, but I'm just saying you can overplay it. Like some people are basically going on saying, oh my God, it won't tell me about Taiwan, therefore everything about it is a joke. I mean, that's just not reality. I'm not saying that's good to do that. I'm just saying they have a perspective, and it's not, there are a few issues that are sensitive, and, think whatever you want with it. But if you're going to say, oh, like that already does it, I think you're missing out on, like what's really going on,
Well,
honestly.
that's the point. Maybe you'll just realize, okay, I won't use it in that way. But if it's 7.5 or 27 times cheaper, I'll use it in for those ways and not just say I'm not going to use it. Especially for math and things that don't have to be like biased about anything weird. In coding, it'll just work. So you can use it for those use cases only if you want to as well, if they work as well or better.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely worth checking out, unless if you're going to talk about Chinese history or political stuff, like don't use it for that.
Or use it, and you might think
But I don't think it
you
feel
might get a hilarious answer that you're curious of what they think about it. It might give you an insight on what they think, even, which I think is okay, even if it's wrong and ridiculous. It's not bad to ask a question. Like
yeah,
to me, I'd like to ask everything, every model, every time, all the answers to compare. Like I'd love a service that had that. I've thought about like creating my own, like with the drop down, like you ask one question and every model will answer it, the top ones, and just compare them and then pick the best solution. Like you don't have to be biased in them.
although what these ones tend to do is they don't even give you the answer. That's the annoying thing. They're just like, oh, it's too sensitive, and then that's all they say. So there's unfortunately not as much info. Although the funny thing is, again, with the China one, they're probably going to change it. I've seen people really push it on this. So what it does is it starts to answer it because it's not filtered at the it's not censored at like the model layer. It's censored after it, so it will answer everything, and then it triggers something. It says, like, you'll see it written on a screen, and people have taken screenshots, and then it'll say, oh, I can't talk about it, but after it's already written it, and then it deletes it. So they didn't actually build the censorship inside the model. They let the model run, and then if it's a touchy topic, they just shut it down after.
Yeah, it's interesting how
So
that works
just a
because
little insight
it
there.
is open source. So it'll be interesting to see. I've heard that Hugging Face is actually trying to make a version that doesn't do that with it because it is open source. So they're trying to use that model, like the big one, and just see if they can make it less censored, which would be great. I mean, that would solve all those
And I
issues.
think that and the main model isn't censored. That's the thing. Like they're running a separate layer on top. So they should be able to do that because it's like it's developed as a non-censored thing. So all you have to do is take that off somehow. It's not like it has to be retrained. So that's just like one thing. And then the last thing maybe we'll talk about is they also released their, I made some videos on this, you can check it out, but like on our AI Growth Guys channel, but it was the vision where you upload photos and say what's in this photo. I did some tests there, and the image generation, and we compared it to our Cartario using Flux, and our things is a zillion times better. The images are hilariously terrible. I don't even know why they launched it. I mean, like mangled faces, like 10 fingers on a hand, looks like an alien hand,
I agree.
or just really low
They're
resolution.
so bad that I almost think, as what you were talking about, it's probably the wrong model that they uploaded on Hugging Face or whatever you're trying it on, because it's so bad and they're claiming it's good. Usually, their other thing was good. I don't think they're going to say it's good if it wasn't. Maybe someone put in the wrong thing. And then it is Chinese New Year as well right now. All the Chinese are on holidays for a few days. So who knows if that's what happened? We might hear that in a few days. Oh yeah, you used the wrong one. Oh, well, that makes sense at least. So we might have to touch on this next week if that proves to happen like that.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody say that. Although I feel like still though, I'm 99% sure that someone just made a mistake because it's so ridiculous.
Yeah.
And like you said, they're on holidays, so
Well,
nobody's back in the office.
yeah. So that's the thing. It's so bad that like, what else would be the reason? Because it's not even close to a reasonable comparable image model. Like you can't make these claims. People are going to check it, obviously. Like especially for images, you can see it. It looks like a Picasso like picture of someone's face. It's all distorted. It looks ridiculous. Some of those things.
And a lot of things are like 10, 20, 30% worse, which is still in the ballpark. These are like, it's like comparing a phone photo now to like the first iPhone or worse. I would say worse. Like it's such a ridiculous comparison that it must be a mistake.
Yeah, it's not even a comparison. Like
Um,
that, it's like, yeah, it's not even an image model. It's like the first DALL-E, which was awful. It was a complete joke. Like it doesn't compete with anything anymore.
yeah, but but this thing is 100 times worse than the first DALL-E.
Right.
Like that, not even in the ballpark. So, um, before we end this thing, what else do we want to say? Check us out in the description. Go to cartario.com, sign up with your own for a free AI image generator model. Sign up with your email. Give us sign up for our AI growth guys 5-day free course for the growth hacking. What else do we have? We'll put everything in the
Yeah,
description.
we're doing a ton of stuff over here because of AI. We're living in the AI age and we're trying to walk the walk over here. So we have many things to follow us. Even our podcast is on YouTube, but we also do, real individual training videos and showing you real use cases and everything as well. This is more of a chat show, which is kind of an overview of everything, more of a podcast, whereas the other things are more of a how-to and specific learning tutorials. So check us out on YouTube for those as well.
Yeah, so that's a good tip there at the end, Ad. So let's end it here. Drop a like, subscribe, the whole thing, and then we will see you next week, Ad, I guess.
Sounds
I think
good.
with that.
See you guys soon.